Homo erectus, the pioneering architect of humanity. The story of Homo erectus is a profound narrative of survival, innovation, and the gradual awakening of the human spirit. For nearly 2 million years, these ancient ancestors dominated the landscape, evolving from primitive hominins into sophisticated hunters and travelers who ultimately paved the way for modern humans. By examining the fossil record and archaeological evidence, we can reconstruct the life of a species that was much more human than once believed. Discovery and the missing link. The journey to understanding Homo erectus began in 1891 on the Indonesian island of Java. Dutch doctor Eugene Dubois unearthed a tooth, a thigh bone, and a skull cap, identifying a creature that stood upright and possessed a brain significantly larger than a chimpanzee's. At the time, the theory of evolution was still young, and this Java man was initially viewed as a primitive fossil chimpanzee before being recognized as a pivotal missing link. Subsequent discoveries in the 1920s near Beijing, China, known as Peking Man, uncovered remains of over 40 individuals. The striking similarity between Java Man and Peking Man, despite being separated by hundreds of miles, confirmed the existence of a widespread species, eventually formally named Homo erectus in 1950. While early theories suggested an Asian origin, the discovery of even older remains in Africa led many to believe they evolved from Homo habilis roughly 2 million years ago, quickly migrating across the globe. Morphology. A body built for the long haul. Homo erectus exhibited a physical form that was remarkably modern in many respects. They possessed limb proportions similar to modern humans, indicating a sapien-like gait and high-speed throwing abilities. Their height varied significantly due to regional climates and nutrition, ranging from 4 feet 9 inches to 6 feet 1 inch. Notably, unlike earlier hominins, there appeared to be little size disparity between males and females, suggesting a potential shift in social structure. Their faces featured a low, flat skull with a pronounced brow ridge. While these ridges appear strange to modern humans, they may have served as protection against physical impacts or were lost in later species to facilitate more expressive social facial movements. Additionally, Homo erectus was the first to feature a projecting nose, an adaptation likely designed to retain moisture when breathing dry air. Their most significant physical transformation, however, was the brain. Over their 2-million-year tenure, their average brain volume grew from roughly 950 cubic centimeters to as large as 1,230 cubic centimeters in later individuals. This expansion is often linked to an increasingly nutritious, high-calorie diet. Mastery of environment, endurance, and fire. One of the most remarkable traits of Homo erectus was their ability as endurance runners. With a modern human gait and the ability to sweat through bare skin, they could likely run for up to 5 hours straight. This allowed them to engage in persistence hunting, chasing prey until the animals collapsed from heat stroke, a strategy still used by some modern hunter-gatherers. The loss of body hair, which facilitated this cooling mechanism, likely led to the development of dark skin to protect against solar radiation, particularly as the Earth's tilt increased radiation levels during the Pleistocene. Conversely, populations moving to higher, colder latitudes may have developed lighter skin to prevent vitamin D deficiency. Their survival was further bolstered by the controlled use of fire. While evidence of fire usage dates back 1.5 to 1.7 million years, it became a widely accepted cultural norm around 1 million years ago. Fire provided warmth, protection from predators, and, crucially, the ability to cook. According to the cooking hypothesis, prepared food was easier to digest and provided the excess calories necessary to fuel their rapidly growing brains. Technology and symbolic thought. Homo erectus were the inventors of the Acheulean stone tool industry, characterized by symmetrical bifacial hand axes. These pocket knives of the day were multi-purpose tools used for butchery, woodcutting, and preparing plants. They also utilized wooden spears and perhaps even crafted complex bone tools, such as barbed spear tips for fishing. Beyond mere survival, there is evidence of symbolic thinking. Archaeologists have found engraved shells with geometric markings dating back 546,000 years, and ochre pigments as old as 1.4 million years, which may have been used for body paint or decoration. They even constructed rudimentary shelters, with evidence of rock circles used to support poles dating back hundreds of thousands of years. Perhaps most surprisingly, Homo erectus may have been the world's first mariners. The presence of their tools on isolated islands like Flores, Crete, and Luzon, which were never connected to the mainland, suggests they were capable of building flotation devices or primitive boats to cross miles of open ocean. The heart of humanity, compassion and society. Perhaps the most touching aspect of Homo erectus was their capacity for compassion. Fossil evidence reveals individuals who survived for years with severe impairments. One skull of an elderly male showed he had lost all but one tooth years before his death, meaning he would have been entirely dependent on his tribe to provide soft food like bone marrow or mashed plants. Another specimen, the Turkana boy, suffered from a painful spinal condition, yet lived into adolescence, indicating advanced group care. A child with a serious brain deformity was also cared for at least 5 years before passing. These discoveries prove that Homo erectus were not savages. They felt the same powerful emotions we do and valued the lives of their kin regardless of their productivity. They likely communicated through a proto-language. While they lacked the modern vocal apparatus for complex speech, their brains featured areas comparable to the Broca's and Wernicke's areas used for sentence formulation. Their social structures likely involved a division of labor, with specialized hunting parties targeting large game like elephants and rhinos. Extinction and eternal legacy. The decline of Homo erectus began around 100,000 years ago as the climate shifted and more advanced human species emerged. While they eventually faded from the fossil record, they never truly vanished. They are the direct ancestors of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens. Homo erectus was the pioneer that left Africa, mastered fire, and formed the first complex social bonds. Their genetic legacy lives on in us today. They were the first to prove that the human lineage was defined not just by the tools we carry, but by the care we provide for one another. As we look back at their 2-million-year journey, we see not a distant ape man, but the foundational chapters of our own human story. Close your eyes now. Let the heaviness of the modern world slip off your shoulders like a heavy coat you no longer need. Breathe in deep, and as you exhale, imagine the digital glow of the present dissolving into the emerald canopy of the deep past. We are going back to the very beginning of this discovery, to a time when the world was vast, mysterious, and largely unmapped. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, let the silence settle. We drift back to the year 1891, to the sweltering, humid banks of the Solo River on the island of Java, Indonesia. The air here is thick, pressing against the skin like a warm, wet blanket, heavy with the scent of decaying jungle leaves and the rich, sulfurous mud of the riverbank. Can you hear it? The low, rhythmic buzzing of cicadas, a sound that rises and falls like a breathing lung, and the distant, haunting call of a gibbon swinging through the teak trees. In the center of this wild green cathedral stands a man named Eugène Dubois. He is not a casual traveler. He is a man possessed by a singular burning idea that the rest of the scientific world considers madness. He is a Dutch anatomist who has left the comfort of a university career, abandoned the safety of Europe, and dragged his young family to the ends of the earth on a hunch. He believes that the origins of humanity lie not in the cold latitudes of Europe, but here, in the tropics, where the sun kisses the earth with the intensity of a forge. Watch him now. He is knee-deep in the excavation trench, his linen shirt stained with the red volcanic soil, sweat dripping from the brim of his pith helmet. He is looking for a ghost. For years, the scientific establishment has argued that our ancestors must have had large brains first, and only later learned to walk upright, a sort of brain-first evolution. They expect the missing link to look like a genius ape. But Dubois believes nature works differently. He scrapes the earth with his trowel, the metal rasping against stone, a sound that echoes the ticking of a clock counting down nearly 2 million years. And then, it happens. His tool strikes something that is not rock. First, a molar, strange, robust, wrinkled with age. Then, a few months later, the prize that will shake the foundations of history, a skull cap. It is dark, heavy, and fossilized into something like iron. He turns it over in his trembling hands. The brow ridges are thick, like the eaves of a house, shading the eyes from a prehistoric sun. The forehead is low, sloping back. To an untrained eye, it looks like the skull of a giant ape. But Dubois, with his anatomist's eye, sees the subtle curve of the cranium, the volume that speaks of a mind waking up. A year later, nearby, he finds a femur, a thigh bone. It is not the curved, bowed leg of a tree climber. It is straight, it is strong. It is a leg built for walking, for running, for standing tall under the open sky. He calls it Pithecanthropus erectus, the upright ape man. He does not know it yet, but he has just met Homo erectus. He has found the first true traveler of our lineage, but the story is not a triumph, not yet. History is rarely kind to those who rewrite it too quickly. When Dubois returns to Europe, clutching his box of dragon bones, he expects a hero's welcome. Instead, he meets a wall of skepticism. The critics laugh. They say the femur belongs to a human and the skull to a gibbon. They cannot accept that our ancestors walked like us before they thought like us. It's a bit like showing someone a smartphone in the 19th century and having them insist it's just a shiny rock. They simply don't have the framework to understand what they are holding. Historians still argue about the depth of Dubois' despair during these years. Some say he became a recluse, hiding the fossils under his floorboards to protect them from the mocking eyes of his rivals, guarding his Java man like a jealous dragon guarding gold. He spends decades in a twilight of frustration, knowing the truth but unable to force the world to see it. Yet, here in the jungle, long before the controversy, there is only the river, the heat, and the bone. Imagine standing beside him on that riverbank. The water rushes past, carrying silt from the mountains, indifferent to the passage of epochs. You can feel the ghost of the creature he has found, a being that stood here on this very mud 1,000,000 years ago. It looked at this same river. It felt this same sun. It was not a monster, and it was not quite us. It was something in between, a bridge built of bone and blood. As the sun begins to set over the Java canopy, casting long violet shadows across the excavation site, the jungle grows louder, the nocturnal chorus beginning its song. We leave Dubois there, holding the skull cap, frozen in that moment of discovery, and we drift northward, across the seas, across the centuries, toward a new location. For the earth is full of secrets, and Java was only the first whisper. The silence of the past is about to be broken again, not by a single man in the jungle, but by a cave filled with secrets near a city that will one day be called Beijing. The wind shifts now, turning away from the humid, clinging heat of the tropics to blow across the vast, arid plains of northern China, carrying with it the scent of dust, pine resin, and the biting chill of a winter that has lasted for eons. We are traveling north, leaving the Solo River far behind, moving forward in time to the early 20th century to a limestone hill near Beijing known locally as Zhoukudian. The locals call this place Dragon Bone Hill, a name that whispers of myth and magic, for the earth here is filled with strange, stony remains that farmers have been digging up for centuries. For generations, these dragon bones were sold in apothecaries, ground into fine powders and stirred into tea to cure anxiety, trembling, or a simple fever. It is a strange and gentle irony to think that for hundreds of years, people were consuming the fossilized remains of their own ancestors to soothe the aches of the living, literally taking history into their bodies to heal the present. Into this landscape of folklore and dry wind steps, a Canadian anatomist named Davidson Black, a man with a fragile heart but an iron will, who becomes convinced that the origins of humanity are hidden here, locked inside the limestone like a secret kept in a stone box. He wears a heavy woolen coat against the biting cold, his breath pluming in the air like smoke as he stares at a single tooth found in the rubble, a molar that looks too human to be a dragon, yet too ancient to be a man. It is the golden age of excavation, the 1920s, a time when science is a rugged adventure and the search for the missing link has moved from the jungles of Java to these dusty caves. But the true hero of this chapter is a young Chinese archaeologist named Pei Wenchong. Picture him on a freezing afternoon in December 1929. The sun is already dipping below the western hills, painting the sky in bruised purples and cold steel grays. The excavation team is tired, the ground is hard, unyielding, and the wind cuts through their layers of cotton and wool. They have been digging for weeks with little to show for it but dust and rocks. Most of the crew is packed up, eager for the warmth of their homes and the comfort of hot tea. But Pei remains. He is lowered into a deep, narrow crevice of the cave on a rope, swinging gently in the dark, armed with nothing but a hammer and a candle. The flame flickers, casting dancing shadows on the wet limestone walls, making the rock seem to breathe. He sees something embedded in the sediment, a curve of bone, reddish and smooth. He brushes away the loose dirt, his fingers numb but steady. It is a skull cap, not a fragment this time, but nearly complete. He knows with the sudden quiet thrill that every scientist dreams of that he is looking into the face of a relative lost for 500,000 years. He wraps his heavy coat around the fossil, cradling it like a newborn against the bitter cold, and ascends the rope into the twilight. This is Peking Man, the northern cousin of the Java discovery, and he changes everything. We realize now that Homo erectus was not just a creature of the steam and the sun. They were resilient enough to conquer the cold. They were survivors who wrapped themselves in furs and huddled together against the ice. Over the next decade, the hill at Zhoukoudian yields the remains of more than 40 individuals, men, women, and children. It is not just a graveyard. It is a home. We find layers of ash, thick and gray, suggesting they sat here, perhaps around a hearth, though historians still argue whether these ash layers were truly controlled hearths or merely the remnants of natural fires that burned bat guano. It is a scholarly debate that continues to flicker like a weak flame, but the romantic image of the first family gathering is hard to resist. Imagine them there, a group of thick-browed, dark-eyed wanderers sitting shoulder to shoulder as the snow falls outside the cave mouth. They are sharing food, perhaps breaking open the bones of deer to eat the marrow, the cracking sounds echoing off the damp walls. It is a scene of immense comfort, the first true living room in history. But there is a shadow over this story, a mystery that rivals the discovery itself. In 1941, as the chaos of World War II engulfed the globe, the original fossils of Peking Man were packed into wooden crates, wrapped in tissue and cotton, destined for safety in the United States. They were loaded onto a train, then intended for a ship, and then they simply vanished. To this day, no one knows where they are. Did they sink to the bottom of the ocean? Were they buried under a tree in a panic? Or do they sit, unrecognized, in an attic somewhere, a box of dragon bones gathering dust? The originals are gone, leaving only silence and plaster casts behind. It feels like a second extinction for these ancient souls, a fading back into the myth from which they came. Yet, the loss only deepens the allure. The disappearance makes them ghosts in the truest sense, haunting the scientific imagination. We are left with the casts and the meticulous notes of Black and Weidenreich, who studied them with such devotion that we know their anatomy better than we know some modern populations. We know they had thick skulls, like a bicycle helmet, one might joke, built to withstand the rough and tumble of a life without safety regulations. We know their brains were growing, expanding with every generation that learned to crack a nut or track a gazelle. The cave at Zhoukoudian was not just a shelter. It was a classroom where humanity learned to be human. There is a profound stillness in the cave today, a museum where the echoes of picks and hammers have long faded. If you were to stand there now, in the quiet dark, you might feel the weight of 500,000 years pressing down, not as a burden, but as a blanket. You would realize that the distance between you and Pei Wenchong or between you and the Peking man, is not so great. We all seek warmth. We all seek shelter. We all try to keep the darkness at bay with whatever light we can find, whether it is a candle, a campfire, or the glow of a smartphone screen. The mystery of the dragon bones reminds us that history is not always solid. Sometimes it is as fleeting as smoke, and we must hold on to what we have, the stories, the knowledge, the feeling of connection, with both hands. As the winter wind howls outside the cave, swirling the snow into dancing spirals, we prepare to leave this place of stone and secrets. We have seen their bones, we have touched their homes, but to truly understand them, we must look closer at the vessel that carried them across the world. We must strip away the layers of time and look at the machine of their bodies. For Homo erectus was not just a brain in a jar. They were athletes of the highest caliber, engineered by evolution for a specific, grueling purpose. The snow fades, the ice melts, and the landscape shifts again, transforming into the golden savannas of Africa, where the sun is high and the horizon is endless. We are going to look at a body built for the long haul, a masterpiece of biological engineering that allowed them to run not from fear, but toward the future. The world warms around us now, the biting wind of the Ice Age retreating into memory as we step onto the golden, shimmering plains of the African savanna. The sun here is not a distant, cold coin in the sky. It is a heavy, rhythmic drumbeat, pounding against the earth with a heat that distorts the air into wavering mirages. We are back in the cradle, the Great Rift Valley, roughly 1.5 million years ago. The landscape is an endless ocean of tall, dry grass, punctuated by the solitary silhouettes of acacia trees that look like umbrellas offering the only mercy of shade. In this vast open theater, a figure is moving. He's not crouching, nor is he scrambling on all fours. He is upright, a vertical line in a horizontal world. This is Homo erectus, and if you were to see him from a distance, squinting against the glare, you might mistake him for a modern marathon runner training in the Kenyan highlands. The resemblance is not a coincidence, it is a lineage. We are looking at the first body in history built specifically for the long haul. The heavy, thick-set frame of his ancestors, the tree-climbing Homo habilis, is gone. In its place is a marvel of biological engineering. His legs have lengthened, stretching out to create a stride that eats up the miles with efficient grace. His hips have narrowed and his waist has become defined, allowing his upper body to twist and counterbalance the motion of his legs, a subtle swivel that saves energy with every step. If you could see inside his skin, you would see the Achilles tendon, a thick rubber band-like cord that acts as a spring, storing energy when his foot hits the ground and releasing it to propel him forward, a piece of anatomy that chimpanzees simply do not have. He is a machine designed for motion, a creature that has traded the safety of the trees for the freedom of the horizon. But the most revolutionary change is not in the bone. It is on the surface. As he runs, his skin glistens. He is sweating. It seems like such a mundane thing to us. We wipe our brows and complain about the humidity. But in the animal kingdom, this is a superpower. Most mammals cool themselves by panting, a process that requires them to stop or slow down to breathe rapidly. A cheetah can sprint at 60 miles per hour, but only for a few seconds before its engine overheats. A gazelle must stop to pant, but Homo erectus has discarded his fur coat. He has traded the thick pelt of the ape for millions of tiny sweat glands that cover his naked skin, a natural water cooling system that allows him to dump heat while moving at a steady trot. He can run while the rest of the world must rest. This endurance is not just for travel. It is the ultimate weapon. Historians and anthropologists call this persistence hunting, a strategy that relies not on sharp claws or overwhelming strength, but on the terrifying, relentless rhythm of simply not stopping. Imagine the hunt. Imagine the eye. It is high noon, the time of day when the lions and leopards are asleep in the shade, paralyzed by the heat. The savanna is silent, baking under the sun. The Homo erectus hunter spots a kudu, a large, spiraled horn antelope, grazing in the distance. He begins to run. He does not sprint. He jogs. The kudu, startled, bolts away at a speed the man can never match. It vanishes over the ridge. A wolf would give up. A lion wouldn't even try. But the man keeps going. He tracks the prints in the dust, his pace steady, his breathing rhythmic. He catches up. The kudu runs again, sprinting until its body temperature spikes, forcing it to stop in the shade to pant and cool down. But before it can recover, the man appears again. Trot, trot, trot. The sound of his feet is a soft, inevitable drum. He does not attack, he just arrives. The kudu runs again. This dance continues for hours, 10 miles, 15 miles, 20. The gap between them closes not because the man is fast, but because the animal is overheating. Eventually, the kudu simply cannot run anymore. Its muscles fail. It collapses into the grass, not from injury, but from heat exhaustion, entering a kind of sleep. The hunter arrives, exhausted himself but still standing, having literally run his prey into the ground. It is a moment of profound connection, a transfer of energy from one life to another, achieved through the sheer will to endure. There's a soft irony here, a gentle joke from the universe. We often think of our ancestors as brutal savages, yet their greatest hunting tool was patience. They didn't overpower the world, they outlasted it. They were the tortoises in a world of hares, and perhaps that explains why, even today, we feel a strange clarity when we go for a long walk or a run to clear our heads. We are tapping into that ancient machinery, waking up the ghost of the persistence hunter who just wants to see what is over the next hill. Of course, scholars still debate the extent of this hunting. Some argue that Homo erectus was more of a power scavenger, using their running ability to race hyenas to carcasses left by lions, stealing a leg of wildebeest before the scavengers could organize a counterattack. It paints a slightly funnier picture, the majestic ancestor of humanity sprinting across the plains, not to conquer a beast, but to steal a free lunch and run away giggling. Whether hunter or thief, the result was the same: high-quality protein and fat. This diet was the fuel for the brain, the high-octane gas that allowed the engine of the mind to expand. But this new life came with a cost. The loss of hair was a gamble. It opened the door to the cooling power of sweat, but it also left the skin vulnerable. As the fur receded, revealing the pale skin of our primate ancestors, the brutal ultraviolet radiation of the African sun became a deadly threat. It burned. It destroyed folate, a vital nutrient for reproduction. The sun, which gave them life and warmth, was now an enemy that could damage the very DNA they were trying to pass on. And so, evolution painted them. It is a slow, silent transformation, invisible to the naked eye over a single lifetime, but obvious over the millennia. The skin darkened. Melanin, nature's own sunscreen, flooded the epidermis, creating a rich protective shield against the solar assault. This was not about race, it was about survival. It was the armor of the equator. As we watch the hunter stand over his prize, his chest heaving, his skin slick with sweat and dark as the rich soil beneath his feet, we see the perfect balance of biology and environment. He is a creature of the sun, forged by the heat, stripped of his fur to conquer the day. He wipes his brow, a gesture so human it bridges the million-year gap in an heartbeat, and looks up at the sky. The sun is beginning to dip, turning the harsh white light into a soft, forgiving gold. The heat is breaking. But as the coolness of the evening approaches, a new need arises. The dark skin protects him from the sun, but it cannot protect him from the cold of the night, nor from the predators that wake when the sun sleeps. He needs a new kind of warmth. He needs a star he can hold in his hand. He needs the red flower that bites. And as the twilight deepens, we see him looking not at the horizon, but at a smoldering tree struck by lightning days ago, wondering if he dares to bring the demon closer. The sun dips lower, painting the savanna in bruised purples and burnt oranges, and as the great golden eye of the day closes, we remain focused on the hunter, standing in the twilight. He is cooling down, the sweat evaporating from his chest, but as the heat fades, a new sensation takes hold: the vulnerability of the naked skin. We must pause here, in the quiet interlude between the burning day and the freezing night, to appreciate the sheer audacity of this physical transformation. To lose one's fur in a world of claws and thorns seems at first glance like a terrible mistake, a bit like walking into a battle wearing nothing but a smile. Yet, this nakedness is the canvas upon which the next great chapter of human resilience is written. It is a story not of loss, but of trade-offs, a biological barter system where humanity exchanged a warm coat for a cooling system and then had to invent a new kind of armor to survive the consequences. Historians and geneticists have pieced together this timeline through a rather unexpected and slightly itchy clue: the louse. By comparing the DNA of head lice, which cling to hair, and body lice, which cling to clothing, and even the pubic lice that require coarser hair, scientists calculate that our ancestors lost their thick protective body fur roughly 1.2 million years ago. It's a detective story written in parasites. This means that for a long, perilous stretch of history, Homo erectus was walking the African plains with skin that was likely pale, pink, and dangerously exposed underneath the ferocious ultraviolet glare of the equatorial sun. Imagine the sunburn. It's a moment that invites a sympathetic wince. Anyone who has ever fallen asleep on a beach without lotion knows the angry, radiating heat of a burn. Now, imagine that burn lasting for generations. But nature is rarely cruel without purpose. The sun is a paradox. It is the giver of life, fueling the plants and warming the earth, but it is also a destroyer. Its ultraviolet rays are like invisible daggers. For those early pale-skinned runners, the sun didn't just burn the surface, it attacked the blood. Specifically, intense UV radiation breaks down folate, a B vitamin that is absolutely critical for healthy cell division and, crucially, for fetal development. A deficiency in folate can lead to severe birth defects. So, in a very real sense, the sun was preventing these early humans from successfully reproducing. It was a silent sterilization. The survival of the species hung in the balance, dangling on a thread of chemistry. And so, the body fought back. It didn't grow the fur back, that ship had sailed, and the need to sweat and run was too great. Instead, evolution reached into its palate and pulled out a pigment, melanin. Slowly, over thousands of years, a blink in the eye of the cosmos but an eternity for those living through it, the skin of Homo erectus began to darken. Special cells called melanocytes ramped up production, flooding the epidermis with dark organic granules that acted as a natural parasol. This was not a cosmetic change, it was the construction of a biological shield. The dark skin absorbed and scattered the harmful UV radiation, protecting the precious folate stores deep within the body. By the time Homo erectus was fully established as the master of the savanna, they were likely as dark as the obsidian rocks of the Rift Valley, a majestic walking shadow capable of enduring the solar hammer without flinching. However, biology is a game of balance, and every shield has a weight. The same UV rays that destroy folate are also necessary to synthesize vitamin D, a hormone vital for building strong bones and supporting the immune system. Dark skin is excellent at blocking UV, which is perfect for the equator where the sunlight is intense and relentless. But what happens when the traveler keeps walking? What happens when the restless spirit of Homo erectus pushes them out of Africa and into the dimmer, mistier latitudes of Europe and northern Asia? Here, the armor becomes a barrier. In lands where the sun is weak and hides behind winter clouds for months at a time, dark skin blocks too much light. The body cannot make enough vitamin D. Bones become brittle. The immune system falters. Rickets sets in. And so, the pendulum swings back. As these pioneer populations moved north, away from the intense equatorial gaze, the evolutionary pressure relaxed. The skin lightened, shedding the melanin shield to allow the faint precious rays of the northern sun to penetrate and do their work. It is a beautiful, breathing dynamic. Humanity is not a fixed color. We are a gradient, a living map of our ancestors' latitude. Our skin tones are simply the body's memory of how much sun our forefathers saw. It is a profound realization that the hatreds and divisions of the modern world are based on nothing more than a localized vitamin deficiency or a folate surplus. a distinct lack of historical perspective, to say the least. Standing there on the savannah, our hunter does not know about folate or vitamin D. He only knows that his skin no longer burns. He feels the coolness of the evening air prickling the hair on his arms, the fine, vestigial vellus hair that is all that remains of the ape's pelt. He is a creature of the boundary, balanced between the heat that allows him to run and the cold that threatens to steal his energy. The loss of fur has made him sensitive to the world in a way no other animal is. He feels the wind change direction before he sees the grass move. He feels the drop in temperature as the sun vanishes, a sudden chill that signals the time of danger. For the sun has gone, and the protection of the melanin is useless against the dark. The armor works only against the light. Now, the world belongs to the things that see in the dark. The hyenas with their bone-crushing jaws, the leopards that drop from trees like silent stones, and the lions that hunt in coordinated prides. Without fur, Homo erectus is shivering. The night is not just cold, it is terrifying. The darkness is absolute, a heavy velvet curtain that hides 1,000 teeth. In the distance, a sound rips through the silence, a laughing manic yip of a scavenger calling its pack. The hunter clutches his wooden spear, but wood is a poor defense against the night. He huddles with his kin, a tangle of limbs seeking shared warmth, their hearts beating in a syncopated rhythm of anxiety. They are the masters of the day, but they are the refugees of the night. But wait. Look back at the horizon. There is something there that does not belong to the darkness. It is the smoldering tree we saw earlier, the one struck by the angry finger of the storm. It is glowing. A soft, pulsing orange eye in the blackness. It breathes smoke. It eats wood. Most animals flee from it. The scent of burning triggers a deep ancestral panic in every brainstem on the planet. To the antelope, fire is death. To the lion, fire is a monster that cannot be bitten. But the hunter watches it. He is cold. He is vulnerable. And in his large, growing brain, a thought sparks, a connection as dangerous and brilliant as the lightning itself. What if the monster could be a friend? What if the heat of the day could be trapped and kept for the night? He stands up, leaving the shivering warmth of the group. He moves toward the smoking tree, his bare feet silent on the cooling earth. He's about to make a decision that will split history in two. He's about to reach out and touch the forbidden flower. The air grows warmer as he approaches, the smell of acrid smoke filling his wide, projecting nose. He sees a branch that has fallen, one end consumed by flickering tongues of orange and blue. It snaps and pops, alive with energy. He reaches out a hand, his dark skin glowing in the amber light. He does not know it, but he is reaching for the keys to the kingdom. The fear is there, tight in his throat, but the curiosity is stronger. He is a moth who has decided to become the flame. He grabs the unburnt end of the branch. He lifts it. And for the first time in the history of the world, a creature holds the sun in its hand. The branch trembles in his hand, a living thing of cracking bark and dancing light. He holds it away from his body, the heat radiating against his dark skin like a physical weight, a strange and terrible companion to bring back to the family. The walk back to the safety of the rocky overhang is a journey of mere minutes, but in the grand narrative of our species, it is a crossing of the Rubicon. He is carrying a piece of the storm. He's carrying the very thing that destroyed the forest, now tamed, or so he hopes, on the end of a stick. As he approaches the huddle of his kin, the reaction is instantaneous and visceral. They recoil. To a creature of the wild, fire is panic. It is the smell of running for your life. A mother clutches her child tighter. A young male bares his teeth and hisses, eyes wide with the primal instinct to flee. But the hunter does not throw it down. He crouches, his movements slow and deliberate, placing the burning limb onto a pile of dry brush and driftwood they had gathered for bedding. The transition is chaotic at first. The dry leaves catch, curling and blackening in an instant, and then, whoosh, the fire jumps. It grows. It breathes. It is a hungry animal, and for a terrifying moment, it seems it might devour them all. But the hunter feeds it. He offers it a thick log, then another. The flames settle into a rhythmic, consuming roar. anchoring themselves to the wood. The group watches, paralyzed by a mixture of terror and awe, as the flickering orange light pushes the suffocating darkness back. And then, the miracle happens. The cold, which had been gnawing at their hairless shoulders, begins to retreat. A delicious wave of heat washes over them, drying the sweat of the day, loosening the tight knots of tension in their muscles. One by one, the fear in their eyes is replaced by a heavy-lidded comfort. They scoot closer, tentative at first, like children approaching a sleeping dog, until they are bathed in the golden glow. This is the invention of the hearth. It is the first architecture not made of stone or mud, but of light. It creates a circle, a definitive inside and outside. Inside the ring of firelight, there is warmth, visibility, and a new kind of community. Outside, the night still belongs to the monsters. But now, the monsters cannot enter. If you look past the flames, into the crushing blackness of the savannah night, you can see them, the glowing, reflective tapestries of eyes. The low-slung shoulders of a hyena, the sleek head of a leopard pacing the perimeter. They pace, they chuff, they growl, but they do not cross the line. The fire is a barrier more impenetrable than any wall of thorns. For the first time in millions of years, the prey can sit comfortably while the predator watches helplessly from the dark. It is a complete inversion of the natural order. Historians and archaeologists still argue fiercely about when exactly this moment became a habit rather than a lucky accident. The evidence is frustratingly ephemeral. Ash blows away, charcoal crumbles, and distinct hearths are hard to distinguish from the remnants of a natural brush fire. Some point to the burnt red clay found at Kubifora in Kenya, dating back 1.5 million years, suggesting that Homo erectus was experimenting with this power very early on. Others look to the Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, where microscopic traces of wood ash and burnt bone, found deep inside the cavern, too deep for lightning to reach, prove that by 1 million years ago, fire was a welcomed guest in the home. It is likely that for eons they were fire keepers rather than fire makers, capturing the flame from a lightning strike or a lava flow and keeping it alive with frantic devotion, carrying it in smoldering fungus or hollow horns as they migrated, terrified of letting the god die. Regardless of how they got it, the effect on their minds was as profound as the effect on their bodies. The fire did something magical. It stretched the day. Before fire, the day ended when the sun went down. You found a tree or a ledge, you curled up, and you stayed silent to avoid being eaten. There was no time for culture. But the fire pushed the night back by 3, perhaps 4 hours. Suddenly there was dead time, time to sit, time to look at one another, time to make sounds that weren't just warnings or commands. In the flickering light, watching the shadows dance against the rock wall, the first stories may have been pantomimed. The camp became the home. It is easy to imagine the scene, an elder mimicking the stalk of a lion, the children laughing as the shadow hand bites the air, the group bonding through the shared release of oxytocin. It was the original primetime television, the first social network, glowing in the center of the dark. And there's a soft human humor in this learning curve. We can easily picture the slapstick comedy of early experimentation. The first man to poke the red flower and burn his finger, yelping and sucking on the blister while his friends hoot with laughter. The realization that green wood smokes and makes you cough until you weep, while dry wood burns clear. These are the small, unrecorded bloopers of history. They learned that the fire was greedy and needed constant feeding. They learned that it could bite if you got too close, but it would kiss you with warmth if you respected its space. They learned to bank the coals, covering them with ash to keep the heart of the heat alive until morning, the first act of planning for a tomorrow that wasn't guaranteed. The fire also acted as a beacon. In a landscape of endless grass, a rising column of smoke signaled safety and kin to a hunting party miles away. It allowed them to navigate back to a central point, reinforcing the social gravity of the tribe. It fundamentally changed their sleep patterns. Instead of the light, fitful dozing of a prey animal constantly pricking its ears for danger, they could fall into REM sleep, the deep restorative dreaming sleep, because someone was always awake, tending the fire. This deep sleep is crucial for memory consolidation and problem solving. In a way, the fire didn't just warm their bodies, it cleared out the cobwebs in their brains, allowing them to wake up smarter. As the night wears on, the group settles. The tension of the hunt is gone, the belly is empty, but the spirit is safe. A young male, perhaps the same one who ran the kudu into the dust, sits near the edge of the flames. He is holding a piece of raw meat, a strip of the antelope carved with a sharp stone flake. He is hungry, but he is also fascinated by the way the fat on the meat glistens in the firelight. He leans forward, perhaps to dry his hands, or simply to inspect the flames closer, and the meat slips. It falls from his fingers, tumbling into the hot gray ash and red coals at the edge of the hearth. He reaches for it, but pulls back. It is too hot. He watches, frustrated, as the meat sizzles. The smell changes. It is no longer the metallic tang of raw blood. It is something richer, deeper, a savory aroma that makes his mouth water in a way he has never experienced before. The fat renders, dripping onto the coals with a hiss, sending up a plume of flavorful smoke. He waits, impatient, poking at it with a stick until he can rake it out of the fire. The meat is gray and charred on the outside, hot to the touch. He blows on it, then takes a tentative bite. The fibers pull apart easily. It is tender. And the taste is a revelation that will rewrite his biology. The meat is hot, scorching the fingertips, but the flavor that floods the mouth is unlike anything that has ever existed on Earth before. It is not the metallic, iron-heavy taste of raw flesh, nor the bland resistance of tough muscle fibers that must be gnawed for hours to be swallowed. It is rich, it is savory, it is tender. The heat has done the work of chewing before the food even touches the tongue. The proteins have unraveled, the collagen has melted into gelatin, and the sugars have caramelized in that magical chemical dance we now call the Maillard reaction. For the hunter, crouched there in the flickering light, it is simply a miracle. He takes another bite and another, his eyes widening. He hands a piece to the female beside him. She sniffs it, pulls back, then tastes. The hesitation vanishes. They are eating not just for survival, but for pleasure. In this quiet, smoky moment, the concept of cuisine is born. This accident, the burnt offering retrieved from the ashes, is the spark that ignites the true explosion of humanity. Historians and primatologists call this the cooking hypothesis, and it suggests that the control of fire was not just a tool for warmth, but the external stomach of our species. Consider the life of a chimpanzee, our closest living relative. To survive on raw fruit leaves and the occasional monkey, a chimp must spend roughly 6 hours a day just chewing. Raw food is stubborn. It fights back. It requires massive jaw muscles and a long, expansive gut to ferment and break down the tough plant fibers. Energy is trapped inside the food, locked behind walls of cellulose and connective tissue that the body must work tirelessly to batter down. But fire changes the equation. Fire is a pre-digestive machine. When Homo erectus began to cook, whether it was roasting meat on a stick or baking tubers in hot ash, they were outsourcing digestion to the flames. The heat breaks down the cells, gelatinizes the starches, and softens the meat, making the energy instantly available to the body. Suddenly, a meal that took an hour to eat could be consumed in 10 minutes. The caloric return skyrocketed. It was as if they had traded a bicycle for a sports car. The fuel was the same, but the engine was suddenly getting 10 times the mileage. The impact on the body was immediate and dramatic. Because they no longer needed a massive fermentation vat gut to process raw vegetation, the human digestive system began to shrink. The rib cage, once flared at the bottom to accommodate a large belly, narrowed into the more cylindrical barrel-shaped chest we have today. The jaw, no longer required to act as a heavy-duty vice for crushing roots, became smaller, more delicate. The massive teeth of their ancestors retreated, leaving behind the more modest bite we see in the mirror. It's a funny thought, really. We are the only species on the planet that needs a knife and fork because we evolved to let physics do the cutting for us. But the most important change was not in the stomach or the jaw. It was upstairs. The brain is a greedy organ. In modern humans, it makes up only about 2% of our body weight, yet it consumes a staggering 20% of our resting energy. It is a biological luxury item, a high-maintenance supercomputer that demands constant fuel. In the wild, you simply cannot afford a big brain and a big gut at the same time. The energy budget doesn't balance. This is the expensive tissue hypothesis. By shrinking the gut through cooking, Homo erectus freed up a massive surplus of metabolic energy. That energy had to go somewhere, and it went straight to the head. Over the course of their reign, the brain of Homo erectus ballooned. It grew from the size of a refined ape's to nearly the size of a modern human's, fueled by the efficiency of cooked proteins and fats. This wasn't just about size, it was about complexity. The frontal lobes expanded, the wiring grew denser, and the capacity for planning, memory, and social nuance deepened. They were literally eating their way to intelligence. It is a humbling realization that Shakespeare, Einstein, and the invention of the internet were all made possible because a hairy ancestor millions of years ago decided he preferred his gazelle steak medium rare. However, the fire did more than just feed the brain. It taught the mind to wait. Cooking is a lesson in delayed gratification. When a chimpanzee finds a fig, it eats it instantly. There is no pause, no sharing, just immediate consumption. But cooking requires patience. You must gather the wood, you must build the fire, you must prepare the food. And then, most painfully of all, you must wait for it to cook. You have to sit there, smelling the aroma, hungry and tired, and control your impulse to grab it. This enforced waiting period may have been the gymnasium where human self-control was exercised. It required inhibition, a trait that is the cornerstone of civilization. You cannot have a society if everyone just grabs what they want. You need rules, and the first rule was likely, wait until it's brown. The hearth also became the center of social gravity. In the dark, the fire was the only light, forcing everyone to face inward toward one another. The foxhole camaraderie of the hunt gave way to the intimacy of the dinner circle. Here, observing the faces of their kin illuminated by the dancing flames, they learned to read micro-expressions. They learned to interpret the mood of the group. The act of sharing food, apportioning the roasted meat among the tribe, required a complex understanding of fairness and hierarchy. If the hunter eats everything, the tribe weakens. If he shares, he builds alliances. The meal became a political act, a bonding ritual that knitted the group into a single cooperative organism. Scholars still debate the timeline, of course. While the biological evidence, the shrinking gut and growing brain, strongly suggests cooking started early, around 1.8 million years ago, the physical evidence of hearths is sparse until later. Some archaeologists argue that Homo erectus may have been opportunistic cooks, using natural fires or simple blazes for thousands of years before mastering the daily hearth. It is a ghost in the archaeological record, a behavior that leaves little trace but changes everything. We are left with the shadow of the act, the sudden inexplicable growth of the mind. As the fire crackles and pops, sending sparks drifting up toward the stars like reverse meteors, the group finishes their meal. The bones are cracked for marrow, then tossed into the darkness for the hyenas. The belly is full, the body is warm, and the mind is racing. The firelight flickers against the cave wall, casting long, jumping shadows that look like giants. The hunter watches these shadows. His brain, awash in new calories and buzzing with new connections, begins to see patterns where there were none before. He looks down at his hands. He looks at the stones scattered around the fire pit, sharp flakes of flint and obsidian that they used to cut the meat. Until now, tools were simple things, sharp rocks found or smashed to create an edge, a chaotic smash-and-grab technology. But the mind of Homo erectus is capable of something new. It is capable of symmetry. It is capable of holding an image in the mind's eye, a perfect shape, and imposing that shape onto the world. The hunter picks up a large, heavy stone. He weighs it. He does not just want a sharp edge, he wants a tool that fits the hand, a tool that has balance, a tool that is beautiful. He strikes it with another stone, not randomly, but with a rhythmic, calculated precision. Clack, clack, clack. The sound rings out into the night, a new kind of music. He is not just making a knife, he is sculpting. He's about to invent the Swiss Army knife of the Pleistocene, a teardrop-shaped masterpiece that will become the longest used tool in human history. The fire has fed the brain, and now the brain is ready to shape the stone. The sound of the strike rings out, a sharp, percussive clack that echoes against the canyon walls, a rhythm of creation that will become the heartbeat of the Stone Age. We are watching a master at work, seated cross-legged on the earth, the firelight catching the sweat on his brow. In his left hand, he holds a heavy nodule of flint, gray and cool to the touch. In his right, he holds a hammerstone, a dense river rock selected for its weight and hardness. He strikes. A flake of flint flies off, spinning into the dust like a discarded petal. He turns the core, studies the edge, and strikes again. Clack! This is not the frantic smashing of the earlier times, where ancestors merely bashed rocks together hoping for a sharp edge. This is surgery. This is engineering. This is the birth of the Acheulean hand axe, an object so perfect, so prevalent, and so enduring that it will become the defining artifact of humanity for over 1,000,000 years. Hold the image of this tool in your mind. It is not a simple knife. It is shaped like a teardrop or a pear, rounded at the bottom to fit snugly into the palm, tapering to a wicked bifacial point at the top. Bifacial is the key word here. It means the stone has been worked on both sides, flaked symmetrically to create a converging edge. To make one requires something that no creature before Homo erectus possessed: a mental template. The maker must see the finished tool inside the raw rock before he even begins. He must understand geometry. He must plan 50 strikes ahead, knowing that one wrong blow will shatter the stone and ruin the work. It is a cognitive leap as vast as the distance between a child's finger painting and a blueprint. Archaeologists often call the hand axe the Swiss Army knife of the Pleistocene. It was the ultimate multi-tool. With a heavy rounded base, you could pound open nuts or crush bone. With the long, sharp edges, you could slice meat from a carcass or whittle wood into spears. With the pointed tip, you could dig for tubers in the hard-packed savanna soil. It was the one thing you never left home without. And they were everywhere. We find them scattered across Africa, Europe, and parts of Asia in the millions, literally millions. In some sites, like Olorgesailie in Kenya, the ground is so carpeted with them that it looks like a factory floor that was abandoned for lunch and never reclaimed. You can walk there today and struggle to find a patch of dirt that isn't covered in the work of Homo erectus. But there is a mystery here, a beautiful, lingering question that keeps archaeologists up at night. Why are they so symmetrical? A simple, sharp edge doesn't need to be beautiful to work. A jagged, ugly rock cuts meat just as well as a perfect teardrop. Yet, Homo erectus spent hours obsessively refining these tools, napping them into shapes of exquisite balance and symmetry. Some are so thin and delicate they seem almost fragile. Some are made of stunningly beautiful materials, quartz, obsidian, banded chert, that were carried from miles away, purely for their aesthetic value. This leads to one of the most delightful and slightly humorous theories in anthropology, the sexy hand axe hypothesis. Some scholars suggest that these tools weren't just for butchering gazelles, they were for showing off. Imagine a young Homo erectus male sitting by the fire, crafting a giant glistening hand axe from a piece of rare quartz. He isn't making it to dig up roots, he is making it to say, "Look at my dexterity. Look at my patience. Look at my ability to find good resources. I am a catch." It is the Pleistocene equivalent of driving a flashy sports car. We have even found hand axes that are simply too big to be used, monstrous stones over a foot long that would require a giant to wield effectively. These might have been ritual objects, or perhaps the very first engagement rings, heavy symbols of a promise that said, "I can provide." Of course, not everyone agrees. Historians still argue whether the symmetry was intentional art or just the natural result of resharpening the tool over and over again, whittling it down until it naturally formed a teardrop shape. But when you hold a fine Acheulean hand axe, it is hard to be a cynic. The craftsmanship speaks of a pride that goes beyond utility. It fits the hand with a startling, ghostly familiarity. If you were to pick one up today, your fingers would naturally curl into the same divots and grooves that a Homo erectus hand pressed into 1,000,000 years ago. It is a handshake across the eons, a tactile connection that sends a shiver up the spine. You realize that the hand that made this was not an ape's hand. It was a hand like yours. Curiously, as we move east across the globe, the hand axes disappear. This is the Mobius line, an imaginary boundary that runs through northern India. West of the line, in Africa and Europe, we find millions of hand axes. East of the line, in China and Southeast Asia, we find almost none. For decades, this baffled scientists. Was Homo erectus in Asia less advanced? Did they forget how to make the tools? The answer, many believe, lies in the landscape itself. The East was the kingdom of bamboo. Bamboo is a wonder material, sharp, strong, flexible, and abundant. It can be made into knives, spears, and containers in seconds with a simple sharp rock. Why spend hours knapping a stone axe when you can snap a bamboo stalk and have a razor-sharp blade in an instant? It suggests that Homo erectus was not a rigid robot repeating the same program, but an adaptable genius who looked at the local environment and said, "I can work with this." They were the ultimate pragmatists. The creation of these tools also hints at something deeper. Language. To teach someone how to make a hand axe is incredibly difficult without words. You can't just show them. You have to explain the angle of the strike, the force, the selection of the platform. Not like that, like this. Hit it here, softly. Many linguists believe that the complexity of tool-making drove the evolution of complex speech. The Broca's area of the brain, the part responsible for language, is effectively the same part responsible for complex hand movements. As we learn to shape the stone, we may have learned to shape the breath. The clack, clack, clack of the hammerstone may have been the metronome for the first sentences. As the toolmaker finishes his work, he holds the axe up to the firelight. The edges are translucent, glowing with a soft, amber inner light. He runs his thumb along the blade, testing its bite. A drop of blood appears, a small sacrifice to the stone. He smiles, a soft expression that crinkles the corners of his dark eyes. He is satisfied. He places the tool next to him, ready for the morning hunt. But the mind that created this symmetry is not done. The leap from useful shape to beautiful shape has opened a door in the psyche that cannot be closed. If stone can be shaped to please the eye, what else can be marked? What else can carry meaning? The utility of the hand axe is about to give way to something even more elusive, the birth of the symbol. The first scratch that says, "I was here." The fire has dimmed to a bed of glowing coals, and the rhythmic clack-clack of the stone napper has faded into the symphony of the night. But the restless hands of Homo erectus are never truly still. We leave the dusty plains of the toolmakers and drift back to where we began, to the humid, teeming banks of the Solo River in Java. The air here is heavy with the scent of wet earth and blooming orchids, a stark contrast to the dry savanna. It is midday now, roughly 500,000 years ago. The sun filters through the canopy in dapples of green and gold, dancing on the surface of the slow-moving water. Sitting on a piece of driftwood near the water's edge is an individual we will call the carver. He is not hunting, he's not butchering. He is full, safe, and for the moment, idle. He holds a freshwater mussel shell in his left hand, the pearly interior catching the light. It is a common object, the discarded remnant of a lunch eaten hours ago, but he does not throw it away. In his right hand, he holds a shark tooth, scavenged perhaps from the coast miles away or traded down the river. The point is sharp, harder than the shell. He presses the tooth against the smooth white surface. Scritch. He draws a line. Then he pauses, tilts his head and draws another, angling it back to meet the first. Then another. Up, down, up, down. He's making a zigzag. It is a deliberate, confident motion. He's not trying to crack the shell open. He knows how to do that. He is not sharpening the tooth. He is imposing a pattern onto a blank canvas. This is not a tool for survival. This is a doodle. When this shell was rediscovered in a museum drawer in 2014, having sat unnoticed since Eugene Dubois dug it up in the 1890s, it sent a shockwave through the scientific community. For decades, we believed that art, symbolism, and the desire to make marks were the exclusive domain of modern humans, arriving only 40,000 years ago with the cave paintings of Europe. We thought Homo erectus was too primitive for such whimsy. But here, etched into a shell dated to between 430,000 and 540,000 years ago, was proof that the lights were on much earlier than we thought. The engraving is geometric, precise, and deeply intentional. It required a steady hand and a focused mind. What was he thinking? Our carver by the river? Historians and archaeologists still argue whether this can truly be called art. Was it a symbol of a river flowing, a mountain range, or was it simply the Pleistocene equivalent of sketching on a notepad during a long, boring meeting? Perhaps it was just a tactile pleasure, the satisfaction of seeing a mark appear where there was none before. There is a gentle humor in imagining this ancient ancestor engaging in the same mindless creativity that we do when we draw cubes or swirls in the margins of a notebook. It connects us across the abyss of time, the universal human need to fidget with intent. But the shell is not alone. If we travel back to Africa, to the Kaptharan Formation in Kenya, we find something even more colorful. We find red ochre. Ochre is a soft, clay-like earth pigment that, when ground up or rubbed, produces a vivid blood-red powder. We have found lumps of this material that were clearly used by Homo erectus nearly 285,000 years ago. They are worn down like old crayons. Why collect red dirt? You cannot eat it. It does not make a spear sharper. The only reason to gather ochre is to change the color of something. They may have used it to cure hides, yes, but the more compelling theory is that they used it on themselves. Imagine a group of Homo erectus preparing for a hunt or a gathering. They grind the red stone into a powder, mix it with animal fat to create a paste, and paint their dark bodies. A stripe of red across the chest, a circle on the forehead. Suddenly, the body is not just a biological machine, it is a billboard. It communicates, I am strong. I am part of this tribe. I am mourning. This is the birth of symbolic culture. It is the moment when humanity realized that we could alter our appearance to send a message. It is the prehistoric origin of every tattoo, every lipstick, every military uniform, and every piercing in history. We are the species that decorates itself, and Homo erectus held the first brush. These acts, the engraving on the shell, the painting of the body, speak to a mind that is beginning to understand the concept of me versus you. It suggests a level of self-awareness that goes beyond simple survival. To paint yourself is to know that you are being looked at. To carve a design is to know that you can leave something behind that will outlast the moment. It is the first whisper of the ego, the first quiet declaration of identity in a world that was previously just teeth and claws. There is also a profound intimacy in the shell. The zigzag pattern is so faint that it would have been invisible in the dim light of a cave. It was meant to be seen in the daylight, or perhaps felt with the thumb. It feels personal, a private secret kept by the maker. When the carver is finished, he does not mount it on a wall. He drops it into the mud. It is covered by the silt of the Solo River, buried under layers of volcanic ash, waiting 500,000 years for a Dutch doctor to dig it up, and a team of 21st century scientists to photograph it under a microscope. It is a message in a bottle that took 5,000 centuries to arrive. The existence of these useless behaviors challenges the old view of Homo erectus as a robotic survivalist. Robots don't doodle. Robots don't paint themselves red. These are the actions of a creature that has mastered its environment enough to have spare time. They had moments of leisure. They had moments of boredom. And in those quiet spaces between the hunt and the sleep, the mind began to wander. It began to ask, what if? This curiosity, this drive to interact with the world in ways that weren't strictly necessary, likely fueled their most ambitious expansion. If you can imagine a pattern on a shell, you can imagine a world beyond the horizon. If you can see yourself as an individual painted in red, you can see yourself as an explorer. The leap from marking the shell to marking the map is smaller than it seems. Both require the ability to visualize something that isn't there yet. And so, we leave the carver by the riverbank. The shell sinks into the mud. The water ripples outward, touching the far bank and then flowing on toward the sea. The river is a road and Homo erectus was a traveler. But for a long time, we thought water was a barrier they could not cross. We thought they were landlocked, tethered to the continents by their fear of the deep. We were wrong. The water of the Solo River eventually reaches the ocean, and it is there, on the edge of the great blue expanse, that the next chapter of our story unfolds. The doodler by the river had a cousin who looked at the open sea, the terrifying, endless blue desert, and didn't see a wall. He saw a bridge. We are about to witness an achievement so staggering that for decades, scientists simply refused to believe it was possible. We are going to the islands. We are going to sail. The air changes now. The rich, earthy scent of the jungle floor and the river mud fades, replaced by something sharper, cleaner, and vastly more intimidating. The smell of salt. We have walked out of the forest and onto the white, blinding sands of a beach in Southeast Asia. Before us lies the ocean, a vast, heaving expanse of blue that stretches to the edge of the world. To a land mammal, the ocean is usually the end of the road. It is a barrier more absolute than any mountain range. A tiger might swim a few miles, an elephant might wade across a channel. But the deep open ocean, that is the domain of monsters and silence. Yet, as we stand on this prehistoric shore, listening to the rhythmic crash of the waves, a sound that has been the lullaby of the planet for billions of years, we are about to witness the most impossible journey of the Stone Age. For a long time, historians and archaeologists drew a line in the water. It was called the Wallace Line, named after the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace. It runs through the Indonesian archipelago, a deep invisible trench in the ocean floor that separates the biological world of Asia from the biological world of Australia and its islands. Even during the peak of the ice ages, when global sea levels dropped by hundreds of feet and turned shallow seas into land bridges, the Wallace Line remained a deep, treacherous moat of open water. On one side were tigers, rhinos, and monkeys. On the other were marsupials and strange, isolated creatures. It was believed that no primitive human could cross it. Homo erectus was a walker, not a swimmer. But the stones do not lie. On the island of Flores, a lush, isolated emerald east of the line, archaeologists found stone tools. Not just a few, but thousands. And they were old, dating back at least 800,000 years, perhaps even 1,000,000. Then, on the island of Luzon in the Philippines, they found butchered rhino bones dating back 700,000 years. Then came the whispers from the Mediterranean, hand axes found on the island of Crete, another fortress of rock surrounded by deep water. These discoveries shattered the old assumptions. These islands were never connected to the mainland. There was no walking there. The only way to arrive was to float. This realization forces us to reimagine Homo erectus entirely. We must stop seeing them as simple wanderers who followed herds of gazelle until they ran out of land. We must see them as mariners. Picture a group of them standing on the shore of Java or a nearby peninsula. They look out at the horizon. In the haze, barely visible, is a smudge of green, an island. It might be 10, 20, perhaps 30 miles away. To a modern human with a map, that is a short trip. To a prehistoric human, it is a leap into the void. Why go? Curiosity? A shortage of food? Or were they just the victims of a catastrophic tsunami that swept a coastal clan out to sea on a tangle of uprooted trees? Scholars still debate this fiercely. The accidental drift theory suggests they were castaways, clinging to debris after a storm, terrified and praying to whatever gods they knew until they washed up on a new shore. It is the Gilligan's Island theory of evolution, a 3-hour tour gone horribly wrong. But the sheer number of islands they reached and the repetition of the crossings suggests something more deliberate. Accidents happen, but they rarely happen in the same direction 3 times. It implies intent. It implies that someone looked at the water and said, "We can cross that." If they went on purpose, they needed a vessel. They did not have sails or keels. They likely used the most miraculous material in their arsenal, bamboo. Bamboo is nature's pontoon. It is hollow, incredibly buoyant, and grows in vast, dense forests. We can imagine the industry on the beach, the chop, chop, chop of stone hand axes felling the tall green stalks, the stripping of leaves, the lashing together of trunks using vines or strips of raw hide. This was not a solo project. You cannot build a raft capable of carrying a breeding population, at least 20 individuals, men, women, and children, alone. It required cooperation. It required planning. It required language. You cannot mime the instruction, "Tie this knot tighter or we will all drown," without some form of complex communication. The raft itself is proof of a society. Launch day. Imagine the scene. The raft, a creaking platform of green and brown, is pushed into the surf. The water is warm, but the current is strong. They scramble aboard, perhaps 20 of them, huddled together with their precious fire-starting kits, their best stone tools, and skins full of fresh water. As they push away from the safety of the land, the sound of the jungle fades. The known world shrinks behind them. They are entering the blue desert. The journey would have been terrifying. At sea level, you lose sight of the land quickly. For hours, perhaps days, they are alone in a 360-degree circle of water. The sun beats down without mercy. Remember their dark skin and sweat glands? They are essential now. The night brings a different terror. The ocean comes alive with bioluminescence, glowing green and blue beneath the logs, while sharks, ancient perfect killing machines, bump against the bamboo, testing for weakness. The silence is absolute, broken only by the slap of water and the breathing of the clan. In this void, they must have relied on the stars. They must have watched the sun's arc. They were the first astronomers, forced to read the sky to find the earth. When they finally saw the beach of Flores rising from the waves, the relief must have been overwhelming. They washed ashore, exhausted, salt-crusted, but alive. They had done the impossible. They had colonized a new world. On Flores, they found a strange kingdom. There were no tigers. Instead, there were giant rats the size of dogs. There were enormous storks standing 6 feet tall. There were tiny pygmy elephants called stegodon, adorable miniature versions of the giants back home. And there were dragons, massive Komodo dragons that ruled the island with venom and teeth. Homo erectus did not just survive here, they thrived. Over hundreds of thousands of years, isolated on this island, their descendants would undergo a fascinating transformation. Restricted by the limited resources of an island, they would shrink. They would become Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of anthropology, standing only 3 feet tall. But that is a story for another time. For now, we focus on the pioneers, the tall, strong Erectus who stepped off the raft and drove their flag into the sand. There is something deeply romantic about this image. It destroys the idea that exploration is a modern invention. We often think of Columbus, Magellan, or the Apollo astronauts as the great explorers, but they had maps, they had funding, they had a mission control. Homo erectus had nothing but a bamboo log and a hunch. They were the first to look at the horizon and refuse to accept it as a boundary. They projected their minds into the invisible. I cannot see the land, but I believe it is there. This is the essence of the human spirit, the projective horizon. It is the ability to imagine a future that does not yet exist and then build a boat to get there. This journey also speaks to their resilience. To survive on a raft, to survive on a strange island with poisonous lizards and unfamiliar plants, requires a flexibility that is the hallmark of our lineage. They were not specialists who needed a specific type of leaf to survive. They were generalists. They were the weeds of the hominid world, able to take root anywhere. As the sun sets over the ocean, painting the waves in shades of violet and indigo, we leave the mariners on their new beach. They are building a fire, the first fire this island has ever seen. The smoke rises, a signal to no one, a declaration of presence. They have conquered the land, and now they have conquered the sea. But there is one final frontier they have yet to fully reveal to us. It is not a place on a map. It is a place inside. We have seen their strength, their speed, their tools, and their bravery. But were they kind? Did they love? To answer this, we must leave the tropical islands and travel back to the mainland, to the rugged, windswept hills of Georgia in the Caucasus Mountains. We are going to a place called Dmanisi. We are going to meet an old man. He does not have a raft. He does not have a spear. In fact, he does not even have teeth. And his mere existence tells a story more powerful than any ocean crossing. It is the story of the first smile that was gummed, not flashed, and the tribe that made sure he had a reason to smile at all. The warm, salt-crusted air of the tropical islands fades behind us, replaced by the biting, whistling winds of the Caucasus Mountains. We have traveled nearly 4,000 miles northwest to a promontory overlooking a river valley in what is now the Republic of Georgia. The site is called Dmanisi. Today, it is a place of stunning, rugged beauty, where the ruins of a medieval fortress sit atop layers of history so deep they touch the bedrock of humanity's exodus from Africa. It is 1.8 million years ago. The climate here is temperate, a land of changing seasons where the summers are hot and dusty, and the winters bring a gray, penetrating chill that seeps into the marrow. This is the frontier. These are the pioneers who walked out of the warm cradle and into the cold unknown. The landscape is teeming with danger. This is the kingdom of the Homo Erectus, the scimitar-toothed cat, a predator with serrated fangs like steak knives that can slice through the toughest hide. There are giant hyenas, wolves, and bears. To survive here, you need to be fast, strong, and armed with sharp stone tools. You need teeth. But in the center of this harsh, unforgiving world, we find a miracle of vulnerability. Buried in the sediment, archaeologists found a skull known simply as D3444. It belonged to an elderly male, likely in his 40s, a ripe old age for the Pleistocene. But it is not his age that stops the heart. It is his mouth. When you look at the jawbone, you expect to see the sockets where teeth once rooted. Instead, the bone is smooth. It has been resorbed. This means that this man did not just lose his teeth after death, he lost them years before he died. He lived for a significant portion of his life completely toothless. In the wild, for a predator or a scavenger, losing your teeth is usually a death sentence. It is the end of the line. You cannot chew meat, you cannot crack nuts, you cannot defend yourself. Nature, in its cold actuarial logic, should have selected him for extinction. He was a caloric burden. He could not hunt. He could not process the tough fibrous plants or the raw meat that sustained the group. Yet, he lived. This simple fact, a smooth jawbone, shatters the myth of the savage caveman. It forces us to confront the reality that Homo erectus was capable of profound compassion. How did this old man survive? He did not survive alone. Someone else hunted for him. Someone else gathered for him. And, in a detail that is both biologically fascinating and deeply touching, someone else likely chewed for him. Imagine the scene. The tribe is gathered around the fire as the Georgian wind howls outside, rattling the brush walls of their shelter. They have returned from a hunt with a deer. The meat is tough, stringy, and raw, or perhaps lightly roasted. The old man sits by the warmth, his body frail, his stomach rumbling. A younger member of the group, perhaps a daughter, a son, or just a friend, takes a piece of the meat. They do not hand it to him. Instead, they put it in their own mouth, they chew it, they break down the fibers, mixing it with saliva, turning it into a soft, digestible pulp. Then, they pass it to the old man. To modern sensibilities, this might elicit a squeamish reaction. But strip away the hygiene standards of the 21st century and look at the intent. This is the bird feeding of humanity. It is an act of supreme intimacy and care. It says, "I will use my strength to sustain your weakness." It transforms the meal from a biological necessity into a ritual of love. The old man eats not because he is strong, but because he is valued. Historians still argue about the why. Why keep him alive? In a world where every calorie counts, why support a member who cannot contribute to the caloric bottom line? This is where the grandmother hypothesis, or in this case, the grandfather hypothesis, comes into play. The old man may not have had teeth, but he had something far more valuable, a library in his head. He remembered. He remembered where the waterholes were during the great drought 10 years ago. He knew which berries caused sickness and which cured a stomach ache. He knew how to nap a tricky piece of obsidian that kept shattering in the hands of the novices. He was the keeper of the map. In a pre-literate society, the elderly are not burdens, they are the hard drives. Losing an elder was like burning down a library. By keeping him alive, the tribe was preserving its own software. They were trading meat for wisdom. There is also the emotional argument. Perhaps they didn't calculate his utility at all. Perhaps they just loved him. He was a father who had once carried them when they were small. He was a friend who had stood shoulder to shoulder with them against the hyenas. The bond of the group was not purely transactional. It was emotional. Homo erectus had developed the capacity for empathy, the ability to feel the pain of another and the desire to alleviate it. This is the bedrock of morality. It is the moment when survival of the fittest evolved into survival of the cared for. The presence of the old man of Dmanisi also suggests a complex social structure. It implies that the group was stable enough to have a home base where the infirm could stay while others hunted. It implies a division of labor. It implies a society where value is not solely determined by physical output. It is a mirror held up to our own modern debates about how we treat our elderly, and the reflection is humbling. These primitives were willing to pre-chew meat for a toothless senior in a cave. Meanwhile, we sometimes struggle to make a phone call. As the years passed, the old man eventually died. But he was not left for the scavengers. The fact that his skull was found within the settlement suggests he was buried or at least laid to rest with his kin. The wind of Georgia buried him in sediment, sealing his story in the earth. He became a fossilized testament to the softness of the human heart. He was not the only one. The fossil record is dotted with other examples of care. We have found Homo erectus bones that show healed fractures, legs that were broken and then knit back together. A broken leg in the wild prevents you from walking, foraging, or fleeing. To heal a broken femur takes weeks, even months of rest. For a nomad, this is impossible unless someone carries you, brings you water, and protects you. Every healed major bone is a receipt of caregiving. It is physical proof that someone refused to leave a friend behind. So, as we stand on the windswept ridge of Dmanisi, looking out over the valley where the wolves once prowled, we see more than just a struggle for survival. We see the birth of humanity's greatest superpower, cooperation. The saber-toothed cats are gone. The giant hyenas are extinct. But the lineage of the toothless old man remains. We are here because they cared. The wind picks up, whistling through the ruins of the medieval fortress above us, a sound that bridges the gap between the Stone Age and the Iron Age. We have seen the care given to the old, but what of the young? What of the future? To understand the full depth of this compassion and the physical cost of our growing brains, we must return to Africa. We must travel to the shores of Lake Turkana in Kenya. There, in the hot, shimmering sediments, lies a boy who has been waiting for 1.5 million years to tell us about growing pains. He is tall for his age, lanky and beautiful. But he is in pain. His spine is twisted. He walks with a limp. And just like the old man of Dmanisi, his story is one of a tribe that slowed down to let him catch up. We are going to meet the Turkana boy, the most complete skeleton of an early human ever found. And he is going to show us the price of becoming human. The wind shifts again, carrying us away from the cold, gray mountains of Georgia and back to the sun-drenched cradle of humanity. We return to Kenya, to the western shore of Lake Turkana, a place of stark volcanic beauty where the water gleams like turquoise milk in the heat. It is 1.6 million years ago. The air is dry, smelling of soda ash and ancient dust. Here, in the sediment of a long-vanished swamp, lies the most famous teenager in history. He is known to science as KNM-WT15000, but to the world, he is simply the Turkana boy. Discovered in 1984 by the legendary fossil hunter Kamoya Kimeu, a member of Richard Leakey's team, this skeleton is a miracle of preservation. Usually, fossils are fragments, a tooth here, a jawbone there, shattered by time and scavengers. But the Turkana boy is nearly complete. He is a Rosetta Stone of anatomy, allowing us to see the full unbroken architecture of Homo erectus for the first time. Standing over his bones, we are struck immediately by his familiarity. He is not a stooped ape-like creature. He is tall, standing about 5 feet 3 inches at the time of his death, and lanky, with the long legs and narrow hips of a long-distance runner. If he were dressed in a tracksuit and placed in a modern high school hallway, he might look a little distinct with his heavy brow and receding chin, but he wouldn't look like a monster. He would look like a star athlete. But looking closer, the bones tell a story of profound fragility. By examining the microscopic structure of his teeth, specifically the daily growth lines in the enamel, which act like tree rings, scientists determined that he was only about 8 or 9 years old when he died. This is a shock. To a modern eye, his skeleton looks like that of a 15-year-old. This reveals a crucial difference. Homo erectus grew up fast. They did not have the luxuriantly long, slow childhood of modern humans. They hit puberty early, rushing toward adulthood in a world where life was short. The Turkana boy was a child in a man's body, navigating a dangerous world with a brain that was still wiring itself. And he was suffering. Detailed analysis of his spine reveals a subtle but agonizing truth. He suffered from a congenital condition, likely scoliosis or a herniation of the vertebrae that would have caused chronic lower back pain. Walking, let alone running or hunting, would have been difficult. Every step sent a jolt of pain through his nervous system. In the merciless arithmetic of the wild, a predator that cannot run is a predator that starves. A prey animal that limps is dinner. Yet, the Turkana boy lived. He grew. He ate well enough to build a skeleton of impressive size. Just like the old man of Dmanisi, this boy was not abandoned. When the pain flared and he lagged behind the group, they didn't leave him for the hyenas. They slowed down. When the hunt was over, they brought him meat. It is a powerful image, a group of hardened survivalists, masters of the spear and the fire, adjusting their pace to the limp of a child. It suggests that the bonds of kinship were stronger than the urge for efficiency. They were investing in him not for what he could do today, but for who he was. His skeleton also highlights the great evolutionary tug-of-war that defines our species, the battle between the hips and the head. The Turkana boy had a brain volume of about 880 cubic centimeters, impressive for his age, and destined to grow larger had he lived. But a big brain requires a big head at birth. To deliver a big-headed baby, a female needs wide hips. However, wide hips are terrible for running. They are mechanically inefficient. Homo erectus was built to run. So, evolution struck a compromise, known as the obstetric dilemma. The solution was to give birth early. Human babies are born in a state of helplessness compared to other primates. A baby chimp can cling to its mother's fur almost immediately. A human baby is a floppy, dependent bundle that cannot even lift its own head for months. This secondary altriciality meant that Homo erectus mothers had to carry their infants for a long time. They couldn't just drop them and hunt. This biological necessity forced the creation of a village. It required fathers, grandmothers, and siblings to step in and help. It created the need for pair bonding and shared childcare. The helplessness of the infant was the glue that held the tribe together. The Turkana boy, in his early years, was likely passed from arm to arm, a communal responsibility that wove the social fabric of the group tighter than any other species on Earth. Sadly, the boy's story ends in tragedy. We do not know exactly what killed him. There are no marks of a leopard's teeth on his bones, no crushed skull from a club. The most likely culprit is an infection. Perhaps a gum abscess that went septic, a reminder that in a world without antibiotics, a toothache was a fatal condition. He wandered away from the group, perhaps delirious with fever, and collapsed in the shallow, reedy water of a swamp. The swamp, usually a place of decay, became his tomb. He sank quickly into the soft, anoxic mud. The lack of oxygen prevented scavengers and bacteria from destroying his bones. The silt wrapped him in a gentle, heavy embrace, preserving him for 1.6 million years. He waited in the dark, a silent messenger, until a Kenyan fossil hunter saw a fragment of his skull gleaming in the sun. His death was lonely, but his life was not. He was a child of a community. As we stand over his reconstructed skeleton in a museum, we are looking at the first teenager in history. Awkward, growing too fast, in pain, but loved. His existence proves that the human in Homo erectus was not just about walking upright, it was about leaning on one another. But there is one final mystery that the Turkana boy whispers to us, a secret hidden in the vertebrae of his neck. His spinal canal, the hole through which the spinal cord passes, was narrower than yours or mine. This suggests he had fewer nerve connections controlling his rib cage and diaphragm. This seemingly minor anatomical detail ignites a fierce debate about the most important human trait of all: language. Could he speak? To speak like we do, to recite poetry, to give a speech, to sing a lullaby, requires incredible breath control. We must regulate the air leaving our lungs with millisecond precision to vibrate our vocal cords. The Turkana boy's narrow spinal canal suggests he might not have had this fine motor control over his breathing. Some scientists argue this means he had limited speech, perhaps short, simple sentences, or a proto-language of grunts and gestures, lacking the complex grammar of a Shakespeare sonnet. Others argue that the narrow canal is just a symptom of his spinal disease, not the species standard. They point to the Broca's area in his brain, which was well developed. They point to the complexity of the hand axes and the rafts. You cannot build a boat with grunts. So, as we leave the boy in the silence of the museum, we step out into the twilight of the prehistoric world and listen. The air is not silent. It is filled with sound. We are entering the realm of the first conversations. We are going to try to hear what they said. We are going to explore the birth of the word, the invisible tool that allowed them to conquer the world not with stone, but with stories. The fire is crackling, the shadows are dancing, and someone is about to break the silence. The sun has fully set now, and the world is painted in the deep velvet blues of the late Pleistocene night. We are sitting in the circle of light cast by the fire, surrounded by the towering darkness of the African rift, or perhaps the caves of Zucudian, or the riverbanks of Java. It doesn't matter where, for the scene is the same everywhere Homo erectus has traveled. The flames snap and hiss, throwing sparks into the air like fireflies. The group is huddled close, shoulders touching, eyes fixed on the dancing light. But listen. Beneath the crackle of the wood and the distant hoot of an owl, there is another sound. It is a low, rhythmic murmur. It rises and falls, punctuated by sharp intakes of breath and soft, guttural laughter. It is the sound of the first conversation. For decades, scientists believed that language, true, complex grammatical speech, was a recent invention, a big bang of the mind that appeared only with Homo sapiens around 50,000 years ago. They thought Homo erectus was a silent creature, communicating only through grunts, shrieks, and pantomimes, much like a clever ape. But the evidence we have gathered suggests that the silence was broken much, much earlier. The first words were not written in stone, but they were carved into the brain. We cannot dig up a voice. Words do not fossilize. They vanish the moment they are spoken, leaving no trace in the sediment. But we can look at the hardware. We know that the brains of Homo erectus had a well-developed Broca's area, the region in the frontal lobe responsible for speech production, and a Wernicke's area, which handles comprehension. These bumps on the brain surface are visible in the endocasts, molds of the inside of the skull, of specimens like the Turkana boy and Peking man. Why would evolution build a specialized speech center if they weren't using it? It would be like evolving a wing but never flying. However, the hardware extends beyond the brain. To speak, you need a precise instrument. You need a larynx that sits low in the throat, creating a large resonance chamber above the vocal cords. You need a tongue that is flexible and thick, capable of shaping the air into vowels and consonants. And you need the hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped bone that anchors the tongue and allows for articulation. While soft tissue rots, we have found hyoid bones in later ancestors that look remarkably human. It is likely that Homo erectus had a voice that was deep, resonant, and capable of a range of sounds far beyond a chimp's hoots. But what did they say? It is unlikely they were discussing philosophy or the nature of the stars. The first language was almost certainly utilitarian. It was the language of put that there, watch out, and the meat is ready. It was a tool, just like the hand axe, used to manipulate the world. Imagine the frustration of trying to teach a child to nap a perfect Acheulean hand axe without words. You can show them, yes, but how do you explain the concept of a striking platform or angle of incidence? Experiments with modern humans show that trying to teach stone napping with gestures alone is incredibly difficult and slow. But add simple verbal instructions and the learning curve skyrockets. The complexity of their tools demands the complexity of their tongue. There is another theory, warmer and more intimate, known as the gossip hypothesis. In the animal kingdom, primates bond by grooming, picking lice and dirt out of each other's fur. It is a time-consuming process that builds trust and releases oxytocin, the love hormone. But as Homo erectus groups grew larger, up to 100 or 150 individuals, grooming everyone became impossible. You would spend all day picking nits and have no time to hunt. So, they invented vocal grooming. Language allowed them to touch multiple people at once with their voice. They could sit by the fire and hum, chant, or chat, bonding with the entire group simultaneously. This proto-language, let's call it Erectan, probably didn't have the strict grammar of Latin or the vocabulary of English. It might have lacked tenses. I hunt might mean I am hunting now, I hunted yesterday, or I will hunt tomorrow, depending on the context and the frantic waving of a spear. It was a me Tarzan you Jane style of communication, stripped of nuance but heavy with meaning. But even this rudimentary speech was a superpower. It allowed them to plan. A wolf pack can coordinate a hunt in the moment, reacting to the prey's movements. But Homo erectus could say, you go to the river, I wait in the tall grass, we attack at sunset. They could displace time and space, organizing a future event in their heads. This ability to coordinate transformed them from individual hunters into a tactical army. There is also a musical quality to this early speech. Some linguists suggest that before we spoke in sentences, we spoke in songs, holistic utterances, long melodic phrases that carried emotional meaning rather than specific definitions. A mother's hum to a crying infant is a universal language that predates words. A rhythmic chant before a hunt unites the heartbeats of the tribe. In the flickering firelight, the voice of the storyteller, perhaps the old man of Dmanisi, would rise and fall, not just conveying information, but regulating the emotions of the group. The voice was a leash that held the darkness at bay. And let us not forget the role of laughter. Laughter is an ancient reflex, a signal that danger has passed, a way to diffuse tension. In a life filled with predators and precarious survival, the ability to laugh together at a mistake, a tripped foot, a burnt piece of meat, was a vital release valve. It signaled, we are safe, we are together. The sound of laughter echoing in a cave 1.5 million years ago is the sound of humanity relaxing. Of course, scholars still argue about the singing Neanderthals versus the grunting Erectus. Some believe speech arrived late and sudden. But the sheer success of Homo erectus, their migration to islands, their survival in cold climates, their care for the sick, argues against silence. You cannot care for a paralyzed boy for years without words of comfort. You cannot cross an ocean on a bamboo raft in total silence. The silence of the archaeological record is misleading. The past was noisy. As the night deepens, the conversation by the fire slows. The low murmurs fade into the rhythmic breathing of sleep. The fire burns down to embers, casting a faint red glow on the sleeping faces. They are resting, for tomorrow brings a new challenge. The world is changing. The climate is not static. The warm, stable epoch that cradled their early evolution is coming to an end. The earth is beginning to wobble. The ice is coming. We are about to enter the era of the great fluctuations. The ice ages are not a single block of cold, but a jagged rhythm of freezing and thawing, a climatic whiplash that will test the adaptability of every living thing. Homo erectus is about to become the ultimate wanderer, pushing into lands where the snow never melts and the sun hangs low and weak in the sky. They will face the white wall of the north. They will follow the mammoth. They will adapt or die, and as they move, they will change. The upright man is about to give birth to the heavy-browed giants of the cold and the sleek, fragile thinkers of the heat. The fire that warmed us through the night has burned down to a bed of gray ash, and as the smoke clears, the world outside the cave has changed. We are no longer in the stable, sun-drenched epochs of the early Pleistocene. We are entering the era of the Great Whiplash, a time when the Earth began to shudder and shake in its orbit, plunging the planet into a chaotic rhythm of freezing and thawing that would test the very limits of biological endurance. The calm, tropical cradle is gone. The ice ages have arrived. It begins slowly, almost imperceptibly, driven by the Milankovitch cycles, subtle wobbles in the Earth's tilt and orbit that alter the amount of sunlight hitting the northern hemisphere. But the result is catastrophic. The temperature drops. The great ice sheets of the north, miles thick and heavy enough to crush continents, begin to march south like slow, white glaciers of death. They lock up the world's water, draining the oceans and turning lush forests into dry, dusty steppes. The green Sahara vanishes, replaced by the stinging sands we know today. The world becomes a harder, colder, and much larger place. For Homo erectus, this climatic chaos was not a disaster. It was a driving force. They were the ultimate opportunists. As the ice sheets expanded, sea levels plummeted, revealing land bridges that had been underwater for millennia. The islands of Indonesia connected to the mainland. England joined Europe. Alaska reached out to touch Siberia. The blue desert of the ocean turned into a highway of grass and mud. And Homo erectus walked. They followed the herds of mammoth, woolly rhino, and giant deer, creatures that were themselves adapting to the cold with shaggy coats and massive reserves of fat. But Homo erectus could not grow a woolly coat. They had lost their fur 1 million years ago to run in the heat. Now, faced with the biting wind of a glacial winter, they had to rely on their second skin, culture. They wrapped themselves in hides, scraping the fat from animal skins with their sharp stone tools to make them pliable. They didn't sew. Needles wouldn't be invented for eons, but they tied, draped, and layered. They became the first fashion designers, not for style, but for survival. A simple cloak of bear fur was the difference between life and death. As they moved into these new, darker latitudes, their bodies began to change again. Evolution is a relentless tinkerer. In the cold of Europe and Western Asia, the lean, lanky frame of the Turkana boy, built to dissipate heat, was a liability. You don't want to lose heat in a blizzard, you want to hoard it. So, following Bergman's rule, their bodies became stockier, heavier, and more robust. Their chests barreled out to hold larger lungs for the thin, cold air. Their noses grew broader to warm the freezing air before it hit their delicate lung tissue. They were transforming. This is where the story gets messy, and where historians and anthropologists start throwing sharp stones at one another. This period, roughly 800,000 to 400,000 years ago, is often called the muddle in the middle. We find fossils that look like Homo erectus, but different. They have bigger brains, around 1,200 cubic centimeters, nearly human size. They have slightly different brow ridges. Some scientists call these new pioneers Homo heidelbergensis. Others call them Homo antecessor. Others, the lumpers, shrug and say, it's all just late Homo erectus. The debate is fierce, but for our story, the name matters less than the reality. What we are seeing is a species in the process of fracturing. The populations that marched north into Europe were cut off by the ice. Isolated in the cold mist of the continent, they began to drift away from their African cousins. They were becoming the ancestors of the Neanderthals, the stocky, strong, cold-adapted warriors of the north. Meanwhile, the populations that stayed in Africa, baking under the equatorial sun, were becoming something else. They were becoming lighter, leaner, and even more brainy. They were becoming us. And far to the east, in the pockets of Asia and the islands, the classic Homo erectus just kept on going, a living fossil refusing to change, surviving well into the era of modern humans. It is a strange, branched family tree. Imagine a reunion where the grandfather, Homo erectus, is still alive, living in Java, while his grandchildren, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, are evolving in Europe and Africa, completely unaware of each other. It wasn't a straight line of progress, it was a bush, wild and overgrown. We see this transition most clearly in a place called the Pit of Bones, Cima de los Huesos, in the Atapuerca Mountains of Spain. Here, deep inside a cave system, archaeologists found a treasure trove of remains, thousands of bones belonging to at least 28 individuals, dating back about 430,000 years. These people were tall, strong, and clearly related to Homo erectus, but they show the early features of Neanderthals. But the most haunting thing is how they got there. They didn't live in the pit. They were thrown there. This suggests something profound. Funeral practices. Homo erectus, or their direct descendants, were not just leaving their dead where they fell. They were disposing of them, perhaps ritually, in a specific dark place, and with them, they dropped a single exquisite hand axe made of pink quartz, a tool that had never been used. Was it an offering? A gift for the afterlife? Here, take this. You might need it. It is the first glimmer of a spiritual belief, a sense that death is not the end, but a journey that requires luggage. The world was getting crowded, relatively speaking. As these different groups, Erectus, Heidelbergensis, Proto-Neanderthals, moved across the landscape, they must have bumped into one another. Did they fight? Almost certainly. Violence is a primate universal. We find skulls with healed impact fractures that look suspiciously like they were hit by a stone club. But did they also trade? Did they mate? The answer, written in the DNA of modern humans, is a tentative yes. We now know that the boundaries between these species were porous. They were not alien to one another. They recognized something familiar in the stranger's face. A Homo erectus from Asia meeting a Homo heidelbergensis from Europe might have stared in confusion at the different brow ridge or skin tone, but they would have recognized the hand axe. They would have recognized the fire. They shared a common language of survival. But the climate was a cruel master. The ice sheets advanced and retreated in 100,000-year cycles, acting like a giant pump, pushing populations south and then sucking them north. This instability favored the adaptable. The specialists died out. The giant vegetarian bears died. The saber-toothed cats, specialized for hunting megafauna, began to starve as their prey vanished. Homo erectus, the great generalist, held on. They ate meat, tubers, nuts, honey, and perhaps even shellfish. They could live in a cave, a bamboo forest, or the open savanna. They were the cockroaches of the Pleistocene, impossible to kill. Yet, even the greatest survivor has an expiration date. As we move closer to the present, around 100,000 years ago, the trail begins to fade. The classic Homo erectus fossils in Africa and Europe disappear, replaced by their more advanced children. Only in the far reaches of Asia, in the isolated outpost of Java, do they hold on. At a site called Gondong, we find the last stand. Fossils here date to perhaps as recently as 108,000 years ago. These individuals had massive brains and huge brow ridges, the final robust expression of a lineage that had ruled the earth for 2 million years. They were living alongside modern humans. By the time the last Homo erectus died in Java, Homo sapiens were already painting caves in Africa and perhaps even gazing at the same stars. It is a chilling thought. We were not alone. We shared this planet. We might have seen them. A modern human hunter creeping through the jungle might have parted the ferns and seen a wild man, thick-browed, muscular, silent, drinking from the river. Did they exchange a look? Did they fear each other? Or did the modern human see a ghost of his own past? The end of Homo erectus was not a bang, but a slow, quiet fading. The climate changed one too many times. The rainforests of Java shrank, replaced by open woodlands that favored the quicker, lighter Homo sapiens. The game disappeared. The upright man was simply outcompeted by his own descendants. He was the rotary phone in a world of smartphones, still functional, built like a tank but obsolete. But did they truly die? Can you really say a species is extinct if its children are walking the earth? As the last fire of the Ngondong clan flickers out and the jungle reclaims the bones, we are left with a strange realization. They didn't vanish into the ether. They vanished into us. We are the ship of Theseus, rebuilt plank by plank from their design. The wind howls one last time, blowing the dust of the ages across the fossil beds. The physical form of Homo erectus is gone. The heavy brow is smoothed, the jaw is tucked in. But the software remains. The ghost is not in the ground. It is in the mirror. And now, in the final leg of our journey, we must look inward to find where they are hiding today. The jungle of Java is quiet now, the heavy, humid air settling over the fossil beds of Ngondong, where the last fires of Homo erectus flickered out more than 100,000 years ago. The physical form of the upright man, the thick brow ridges, the robust jaw, the barrel chest, has vanished from the visible world, buried beneath layers of volcanic ash and river silt. To the casual observer, it seems like an ending. We often view extinction as a failure, a biological dead end where a species simply stops working and is discarded by nature. But to see Homo erectus as a failure is to misunderstand the very nature of our existence. They did not disappear into the void. They poured themselves into the future. They didn't die out. They just changed clothes. The truth, written in the spiraling code of our own DNA, is that Homo erectus is the foundational bedrock of humanity. We are not their replacements. We are their sequel. Every human being alive today, from the high-rise apartments of Tokyo to the remote villages of the Amazon, is walking around in a body that was designed, tested, and perfected by Homo erectus nearly 2 million years ago. Look at yourself in the mirror. That upright posture, that stride that allows you to walk for miles without fatigue, those sweat glands that cool you down, that is the erectus chassis. We are driving the same car. We've just updated the software and added a few cosmetic features like a higher forehead and a weaker chin. But the connection goes deeper than bone. It is in the blood. For decades, scientists debated the out-of-Africa theory versus the multi-regional theory. Did modern humans replace older populations entirely, wiping them out in a wave of conquest? Or did we mix? The sequencing of the Neanderthal and Denisovan genomes has given us a startling answer. We mixed. Homo erectus gave rise to populations like Homo heidelbergensis, who in turn split into Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, and Homo sapiens in Africa. When our ancestors finally stormed out of Africa 60,000 years ago, they didn't just meet strangers. They met their cousins, and they mated with them. This means that Homo erectus is not just a distant uncle, they are a direct grandfather. Through the genetic bridge of Neanderthals and Denisovans, the ancient lineage of the upright man lives on in billions of people today. If you have European or Asian ancestry, you carry fragments of DNA from these archaic groups. You are a walking museum of the Pleistocene. The ghost is not haunting the house, the ghost is the house. Beyond the biological hardware, consider the cultural software they installed. We often pride ourselves on our modern inventions, the internet, the airplane, the smartphone. But these are merely sophisticated rocks. The true inventions, the ones that actually define humanity, were made by Homo erectus. They invented the concept of home, a central place where the group returns, shares food, and sleeps in safety. Before them, primates slept in trees, moving every night. Homo erectus created the hearth, the living room, the center of gravity for the family. Whenever you feel a sense of relief walking through your front door after a long trip, you are feeling an emotion that was first felt by an erectus hunter returning to the cave. They invented the external stomach. By controlling fire and cooking food, they freed us from the tyranny of chewing. This single act of culinary genius allowed our brains to grow to their current energy-guzzling size. Every time you eat a hot meal, every time you enjoy the smell of roasting meat or baking bread, you are participating in a ritual started 1.5 million years ago. You are feeding the fire that built your mind. They invented the external brain. The Acheulean hand axe was the first time a creature imposed a mental template onto the physical world. It was the first standardized product, the great-grandfather of every mass-produced object we use today. They showed us that the world is raw material that can be shaped to our will. The smartphone in your hand is just a very complex hand axe, a tool we carry everywhere to help us survive and connect. And perhaps most profoundly, they invented human compassion. The old man of Dmanisi, toothless and frail but kept alive by his tribe, and the Turkana boy, limping and in pain but protected by his kin, are the first concrete proof of love in the archaeological record. They taught us that strength is not just about muscle, it is about care. They realized that a group that protects its weak is stronger than a group that abandons them. This moral leap is the foundation of every hospital, every charity, and every act of kindness in human history. We are a species that cares because they were a species that cared. Scholars still argue about the exact taxonomy. Where does Erectus end and Sapiens begin? It is a ship of Theseus problem. If you replace every plank of a ship over time, is it the same ship? Evolution works the same way. There was never a single day when a Homo erectus mother gave birth to a Homo sapiens baby. It was a slow, imperceptible gradient of change, a river flowing from one form to another. We are simply the current downstream. As we look back at their 2-million-year reign, we must shed the arrogance of the present. We often see ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, the finished product. But Homo erectus survived for nearly 2 million years. Homo sapiens has been around for maybe 300,000. We are barely out of the gate. We have a long way to go before we can match their endurance. They faced ice ages, supervolcanoes, and changing climates with nothing but stone tools and each other. They didn't just survive, they conquered the globe. They were the first to look at the horizon and say, "I wonder what is over there." That curiosity, the wandering gene, is their most potent legacy. It drove them out of Africa, across the blazing deserts, over the freezing mountains, and across the terrified open ocean to the islands. It is the same drive that pushed us to the moon and now pushes us toward Mars. When we look at the stars and feel that strange, undeniable pull to go where we have never been, we are feeling the restless legs of Homo erectus twitching in our modern minds. We are explorers because they were explorers. The fire at Ngandong may have gone out, but the flame they carried has never been extinguished. It was passed from hand to hand, from the first spark on the savannah to the nuclear fires of the modern age. We are the keepers of that flame. So the next time you sit by a campfire or watch a candle flicker in the dark, look closely at the light. Let the modern world fade away. Forget the emails, the traffic, the noise. Listen to the silence between the crackles. In that space, you might feel a presence. It is not a monster. It is a grandfather. It is a heavy-browed, dark-skinned, scarred, and smiling traveler who walked out of the dark so that you could sit in the light. He is watching you with pride. He is the pioneer, he is the architect, and he is you. The fire is burned down to a soft, glowing bed of embers now, casting a warm, ruddy light that feels heavy on your eyelids. The great journey is over. We have walked across 2 million years of history, from the humid jungles of Java to the freezing winds of the Ice Age, and finally, back to the safety of this very moment. The vast, dangerous world of the Pleistocene has faded into the mist, leaving only the comfort of your own space. You can let go of the timeline now. Let the dates and the names drift away like smoke rising into the night sky. All that remains is the feeling of continuity, the deep rhythmic assurance that you are part of a story that has never been broken. You are safe. You are warm. You are the result of a million acts of care and survival. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the bed, just as the sediment wrapped the Turkana boy in a gentle, protective embrace. Let your breathing slow down, finding the ancient, steady rhythm that our ancestors found by the hearth. The dark is not a place of fear anymore. It is a blanket. The fire is within you. The night is yours. Sweet dreams.